so many people who are actually joining this morning. In my mind, as I was telling Kathy earlier, I kind of envisioned that I was going to be recording this program to be recorded and then made available to clubs and individuals who could view it at a later date. So when I found out or came to the realization that we'd have people, a kind of quote unquote live audience, that's actually great. And thank you all for taking the time to come. What I'm gonna do this morning is work through the information that I have to provide. I'm going to wait for questions and discussions at the very end. Again, this is because as I think through this and thinking of offering this to clubs within our district and maybe even beyond to put up as a program for their clubs, a virtual meeting, if you will, I think it would be more efficient to work through the information and then at the end their clubs could kind of engage in the discussion that I'm actually thinking that we'll have at the very end. So if that works for everybody, that's kind of the way I'd like to proceed this morning. Kathy has indicated that we'd like everybody to be on mute, and at the end then during the discussion conversation piece, we will unmute everybody, of course. I'll let Kathy kind of manage those logistics. Again, thanks for joining us. I am Judy Freund. My home club is the Hudson Daybreak Club. So I'm sitting here in my home looking out over the St. Croix River. As I indicated earlier, it looks like it's going to be a pretty day. I was the district governor for 5960 in 2011-2012. You know, my husband and I have the opportunity to go out to Washington, D.C. on a regular basis. Our son lives out there. And when we go, whenever it's possible, we take the opportunity to go to visit our senators and congressmen just to say hello. And when you walk into their offices, you're given the opportunity to express concerns that you have, and the staff there will record them, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe a year or a year and a half ago, we walked into one of our Wisconsin Senator offices, and there's always young people who are behind the desks, and we told them of our concerns. And then I asked them, where in Wisconsin are you from? And one of the individuals said, well, actually, I'm not from Wisconsin. I'm from the East Coast, but I'm really learning great things about your great state. So he shared a number of ideas and thoughts that he was learning about Wisconsin. And then I asked him if he, first of all, if he had heard of the St. Croix River. He did not realize that that formed part of the boundary between Wisconsin and Minnesota. I said, have you ever heard of Earth Day? And he said, absolutely. And I asked him if he knew who started it. And he did not. Now, again, this is a young guy, and I have to say I did this program where some of the members were not necessarily young folks, and many of them did not know who started Earth Day. Well, you all do. I believe Kathy put it in your invitation email, and you're looking at the gentleman right now on your screen. This is then Senator Gaylord Nelson. He had been a governor of Wisconsin before he entered the Senate. And as Tom Brokaw referred to Gaylord Nelson, the man from Clear Lake, Wisconsin. That was an amazing sort of revelation to me several years ago. I had reason to be in Clear Lake, and I myself didn't know Gaylord Nelson grew up in Clear Lake, Wisconsin. It is tiny, that community. Many of you know that Clear Lake, along with Amery and Clayton, form the Woodland Lakes Rotary Club in our district, in our watershed. It's amazing. This is the little house that Gaylord Nelson grew up in. You can walk around Clear Lake in a matter of minutes and you'll come upon it. Inside that house, there is a museum. that contains artifacts, pictures, photos, obviously. You know, a couple years ago, a friend of mine, Chris Stein, who at that time was the superintendent of the St. Croix Wild and Scenic River, he talked about coming into Clear Lake, going into the museum, and he was walking through the museum, and he said, on a table, perhaps it was like that table that you're looking at in this photo, there was a pen. And that pen is the pen that Lyndon Johnson had given to Gaylord Nelson when he signed the Wild and Scenic River Act. And Chris was amazed, just right on that table. Well, needless to say, now that pen is at the Visitor Center up in St. Croix Falls, the St. Croix Wild and Scenic Visitor Center, and it is behind a protected area. But this is our legacy. All of this, of course, is in the St. Croix watershed. So Gaylord Nelson started the first Earth Day in 1970. It began as a teach-in. So those of you who were at universities or colleges in 1970 perhaps remember that that was the spirit of the first Earth Day. It was to provide information about the state of our Earth and the state of the climate. So exactly what was the environmental times like in 1970? Well, if you look at this picture, you get a few clues. I'm hoping that many of you know the name Rachel Carson. Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in the early 60s. Her book raised the awareness of pesticides and the damage that they were doing to environment. Specifically, she identified it to birds. And the specific pesticide was DDT. I remember as a child, although I grew up on a farm, when we would go to Fond du Lac, the nearest large community, and visit my brother there, I remember the fogging trucks going through in the summer, and we just thought it was wonderful to run through this foggy mist. Well, what they were doing, of course, is spraying for DDT. The reason people saw that as sort of a clarion call about that awareness is because Rachel Carson was like your aunt down the street. People found her to be extremely trustworthy. So that was one of the first really red flags that started to go up. Actually, there were a lot of them before then. In the early 60s, Gaylord Nelson convinced President Kennedy to take what he called a conservation tour through the country. You know, a lot of times I've come upon places and you'll see images of President Kennedy and you'll think that he was here. Well, part of that was in connection to this. Let's go through the United States and see for yourself what exactly the environmental situation was. I alluded to the fact that the Wild and Scenic River Act was signed in 1968, again, because of concern about the rivers in the United States. Perhaps those of you who remember the first Earth Day remember the Cuyahoga River in Ohio burned. It was on fire in 1969. Apparently there was an oil spill and it caught on fire. The Cuyahoga flows into Lake Erie, which again at that point in time was thought to be a quote unquote dead lake. The University of Wisconsin in Madison started a climatic institute. The issue of the climate and the changing climate already that was that issue was being talked about in the 60s, in the early and mid 60s. There was a report that was delivered to the White House, Lyndon Johnson's White House and Congress, that actually raised this issue of the impact of CO2 on the changing climate. And basically, as we're told, they didn't quite know what to do with that information at that time. If you're looking at this image down in the lower right corner, you see James Lovelock and Gaia. The notion that the Earth functions as one system, one organism. was really presented by James Lovelock. This is the first time that people started to, or were invited to think about that in that way. Right now it seems so obvious, but then it was a new idea. This idea that if planet Earth is stressed in one area, just like the human body, you'll feel impacts and see the impacts in another area. Gaia, I think, is a Greek term that refers to the personification of planet Earth. So all of this is what was going on in 1970 when Gaylord Nelson conceived Earth Day. And as I said, it was the first, Earth Day was a teach-it. Immediately after Earth Day in 1970, lots of things started to happen. The story is told that Richard Nixon was looking out of the White House and he saw lots of young people who were protesting and demonstrating. And he said to one of his aides, "So what are they demonstrating about and how can I turn them all into voters, people who will vote for me?" That story is told in the lead up to the creation of the Pollution Control Agency, which happened in 1970. In 1970, there also was the National Environmental Policy Act, which was signed, and that actually was the legislation that really gave the authority to the Pollution Control Agency to act. The Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act was signed in 1970. The Endangered Species Act is signed in 1973. So around the 1970 and the early 70s, a lot begins to happen in terms of the environment. So where are we today? Where are we in terms of Earth Day, in terms of our environmental awareness 50 years later? There's until the pandemic hit, I mean, it was safe to say, based on previous Earth Days, that over 1 billion people would have celebrated in one way or another Earth Day in over 190 countries. The theme for Earth Day for 2020 is climate change. Let's see, I'm going to go to the next one. It's no surprise, because obviously the climate issue is really front and center, and there's just a myriad of resources that we can go to learn about climate change. I just wanted to point out a couple that are excellent. Again, they're all over. There have been speakers. We have local gentlemen that speak with great authority about the impact of the climate change on the St. Croix River. Mark Seeley is one that comes to mind. But there's a couple issues on PBS on the NOVA series, one which is called Decoding the Weather Machine. This tells a story about, again, someone that many of us may be familiar with, Paul Douglas. Paul Douglas, I don't know how many years ago, 20 years ago or so, was on one of the local TV channels as the weatherman. And he formed his own company, and in 2020, he actually provides information that weathermen across the country use. But early on, Paul Douglas began asking himself, why were these extreme events happening, and how might it connect to climate? So that Decoding the Weather Machine tells that story, and it's really pretty interesting and very science-based. The other one that I have on there is called Polar Extremes. Polar Extremes is not really about climate change and weather per se. It's about, why does planet Earth have polar ice caps? Why are they important? But it really documents the historical record, the geological record, that sort of unpacks some of the science of the impact of CO2 on the climate, and why it is really, really, really important that it never reaches critical levels. So again, these are two programs that I think you would find pretty interesting, and they're great resources. So where are we in terms of the United States? I have on the screen an article from a magazine that I read. Whoops, I'm going to go backwards if I can figure out how to do this. I'm going the wrong direction. Hang on, folks. And I'm going to go back one more. This is an article that talks about the administration's sort of attitude on the environmental laws that were put into place in 1970. I'm just going to read a short quote. 50 years later, the National Environmental Policy Act is under attack. The administration proposed reforms to the act that would significantly reduce its scope. There are efforts to roll back not only Obama-era regulations, but some of the bedrock laws that have shaped federal environmental policy since the 1970s. It's not unique in being a pushback against regulations or even favoring the energy industry, but it is unique in the relentlessness of this effort. There have been at least 50 environmental regulations the administration has targeted, and there is no stone being left unturned. That's a quote from a professor, Daniel Farber, from the University of California in Berkeley. I think many of us are aware of that. Again, the issue is an overreach in terms of regulation. As far as the administration is concerned, I will leave it up to you to decide, you know, how serious an issue that is for you. We can also talk about what is the state of the world's thinking on the issue of the environment. I think all of us are familiar with the World Economic Forum that's held in Davos, Switzerland every year. That's held in January. And each year they take a perception survey. Now, of course, the folks that attend this forum come from businesses, they come from industry, from the financial sector, the technology sector, the environmental sector. They come from nonprofits, they come from governors, they come from governments, they come from academia. So it is really a wide representation of business and industries, et cetera, nonprofits. So each year they take this perception survey, which asks attendees from the point of view of their profession, and they ask them, what's likely to happen this year? Okay, now, immediately, of course, you're looking at this and you're not seeing a pandemic. And in January, that was not on the radar screen of the attendees. By the way, they also do a survey that's not only likely to happen, but if an event happened, what would have the greatest impact in terms of disrupting society? The pandemic was listed on there. But on this top events likely to happen, this was the first year, I'm told, since they started the survey in 2006, that the top 5 were all environmental topics: extreme weather, failure to act on climate, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, and human-made environmental disasters. That list that includes what would have the greatest impact in terms of disrupting society. 4 of the top 5 also are related to climate. So clearly, at the international level, there is an understanding or an awareness of climate as an issue. I think we all know that. So what about, that takes us to Rotary International. I think many of you were aware that a year ago, I was looking for this issue and I couldn't find it. A year ago, or a little over a year ago, the Rotarian magazine presented, or the topic of that issue was the issue on climate change. And if you still have that, it's really interesting to pick up and read, because I love it in terms of not only the current theme for Rotary, which is Rotary Connects the World. Next year's theme is Rotary Opens Doors. The big message that came across in that magazine is that Rotary is capable of creating partnerships, bringing people to the table, and having hard conversations. This is a difficult one, but have those conversations and develop some ideas and some strategies. I also think most of you are aware that the Rotary Foundation, which has, of course, 6 areas of focus that need to be, or one or more of those need to be addressed when you are applying for grants. The Rotary Foundation is considering adding the environmental sustainability as an area of focus. Whether it will be a 7th or whether they will combine 2 of the current areas to keep it at 6, I don't know, but I do know in conversations with folks from Evanston at our multi-district pets, those people are pretty confident that that will probably happen. I think many of you know that our Northfield Club in our district is a leader in going out to other clubs and advocating for the creation of climate action teams. If you're looking for a program, or perhaps they have an online program, it would be a wonderful opportunity to have that conversation in your club. Which brings us to your club. Rotarians are, at the end of the day, optimists. We're optimistic, we're positive, we can get things done. I love that the title of that piece you're looking at, Hope's Eternal Spring. I talked about that climate institute that was developed at the University of Wisconsin in the early 60s that has transformed and be renamed into the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. And the current issue of the Alumni magazine talks about that institute and interviews some of their staff folks. So I'd like to give you just a few quotes. This one is from Arthur Sachs. He said, "What's so encouraging to me is the resurgence of awareness among young people about the importance of this, not only for themselves, but for the future. The thing that gives me hope is the fact that environmental education at the K-12 level, at the undergraduate level and graduate levels has created a new generation of people who see the value and importance and critical nature of the study of the environment." This from Monica White. She says, "I'm encouraged that children in gardens, in places that were previously overrun by tall grass. I'm encouraged by seeing people reconnect with the agricultural environment, using the environment as a place and space to learn new strategies for resilience, resistance, and community health and wellness." Holly Gibbs, who works with bankers, says, "Investment banking gives me hope. This is," she admits, "perhaps a simplification, but she believes increasingly the financial sector is seeing the risks of environmental damage and climate change. And where the money goes, climate change happens. By working with so many different companies, from retailers to commodity buyers to investment bankers, you start to feel this sense that, well, there's just enough good people, there's enough concerned citizens that by bringing us together, we will start to solve this really huge problem." So like I said, Rotarians are people of action. You can get things done, we can make a difference. So what are some project ideas that your club, in whichever community you are right now, what are some possibilities that you might start to think about in terms of raising the awareness, not only of Earth Day and the 50th anniversary, but of the environment? Well, right now, as we are all, kind of sequestered in our homes, we can begin thinking about actions we can do here. We can watch those NOVA episodes. We can plant a tree. We can begin to design a pollinator garden. There's so many resources online. Find out what plants in your area that are appropriate and friendly to pollinators. Later on, when everything opens up again, create a climate action team within your club. Identify those individuals that have this as their passion and give them the authority to move forward with that. Present educational programs in your community. Again, collaborate with your schools and with other interested nonprofits. Join ESRAG's Operation Pollination Project. It's really easy. Sign the pledge, find partners in your community, and begin to make a difference. These are ideas and projects that you can begin to think about now as, well, I guess as we're all given a lot of time to think. You know, there was something else that we were doing in the 1970s. We were sending men to the moon. Edgar Mitchell was the 6th man to walk on the moon in 1973. When returning to Earth, he looked out at this image. You know, these images of Earth from space are the most reproduced images of any. And think about all the pictures that are taken, but these images of Earth from space are the most reproduced. All the astronauts looked at this. You know, there's a scene from the movie Lord of the Rings when one of the hobbits, Sam, looks up to the sky and he sees a star twinkle. And he's struck by what they call this clear, cold shaft that pierces his being, telling him that there's hope way out there beyond the shadows. I believe Edgar Mitchell, was pierced by that same clear, cold shaft. Coming home, he says, quote, "I realized that the story of ourselves, as told by science, our cosmology, our religion, was incomplete and likely flawed. I recognized that the idea of separate, independent, discrete things in the universe was not an accurate description. What was needed was a new story of who we are and what we are capable of becoming." Well, I think that perhaps Gaylord Nelson felt the same thing when he left his legacy, Earth Day. We are Rotarians, and we understand, like Mitchell, that we are ready for a new language of potential. When we encourage children and their parents and grandparents, neighbors and friends to take a walk in a city park or on a remote hillside, to behold the marvels of nature or the most common of occurrences, we know that that instant provides a comforting reminder that life is bigger than any one moment. You know, Martin Luther King used a term called beloved community, and he used that to affirm all people's dignity and the mutual regard for one another. But it also implies a caring, a looking out for. What if, sort of like James Lovelock, that Gaia guy, what if we thought about Earth in the same way? Beloved, it's something that we value, something that we cherish, something that we love, and also something that requires looking out for. So I'm going to close by inviting all of you to think about Earth, our beautiful planet that sustains life, to think about Earth as our beloved community. So with that, I'm going to put up some resources. To access NOVA, those episodes, you just go to pbs.com, go to ESRAG, and you'll find out information about a lot of environmental projects if your club wants to explore some alternatives beyond the few that I mentioned. All kinds of information about pollinators are at, just go to the pollinatorfriendly.org and you just open up a world. And of course, if you go to earthday.org, you'll learn more about Earth Day 2020. So with that, Kathy, I'm going to invite us to have a discussion. I know our club, the Hudson Daybreak Club, had planned a program which is now postponed, but our intent was to invite people from our community, from all, kind of not only leaders, people from all walks of life, from schools, from the city government and town governments, from nonprofits. We were going to invite them to a kind of forum that was going to be themed around clean water, which of course has been and is one of Rotary's sort of landmark commitments. That of course has been, it's been postponed. We'll probably do it in fall. So any ideas out there for other projects? Any thoughts in terms of what we've just shared regarding Earth Day? So while you're all thinking, I'm going to throw one more out there. I'm looking out my window, and I'm looking out, and I can't see the COVID-19 virus sneaking up on me. I can't see it, but we know that it's there because we've seen those images of hospitals. Similarly, I'm looking out of this window, and I can't see, the climate change sneaking up on me. I can't see that CO2 in the atmosphere. But we know that it's happening because, again, of images of these extreme weather events that caused Paul Douglas to really do some digging in terms of the science. It does strike me as interesting, the difference in responses to this invisible enemy out there.
Hi, Judy. This is Marty Harding. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Marty.
Hi, Judy. This was a great presentation, and I love the call to Rotary to use its influence on behalf of our Earth. And I just wanted to add one resource to your list here. Northwoods and Waters of the St. Croix Heritage Area is a name that some people know and others don't, but we are an organization that promotes the natural, historical, and cultural resources of this beautiful watershed that we call home. And I just wanted to say that we've been planning Earth Day activities for about 9 months now. Unfortunately, we are needing to postpone many of those and use other opportunities to get the word out. So I just want to give all the listeners on here one other resource, and that is our Earth Day website, where we have tons of resources for faith communities and schools and parents who are homebound with their kids, and information on Gaylord Nelson with clips of his inspirational speeches. All that stuff is there, and it's local. So if you, I'll just give you the URL and ask, check it out. You can just Google Northwoods and Waters Earth Day, and I think it will come up, but it is northwoodsandwaters.org/earth. That's enough. It'll get you there, /earth, and it'll get you directly to the Earth Day page. And so, Judy, thank you, and everyone who participated on this, for your interest in this call and for all that we are doing on behalf of Earth. And Earth Day is every day, right?
It is.
We're gonna, Judy, I'm gonna tell you what we're doing. See if this resonates with your group. Since, lots of times when you celebrate kids' birthdays and they're like on Christmas and they never get the attention, so you do a half birthday. So we're going to do a half birthday for Earth Day this year and move the events into October. So 6 months from now, we will be celebrating Earth Day in a big way with lots of different activities. So thanks for letting me do the little infomercial here on behalf of our watershed and Earth Day. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Marty. And what I'm going to do is add that link to this resource page so that when folks view the recording of this kind of meeting, that your information will come up as a resource. Also, thanks for the half birthday idea. You must have shared that with someone, because a couple of the other coordinators had suggested that as an idea, and they figured out and they said, this is when we're going to do the Daybreak Rotary Club will do our program sometime in fall. So thank you for that. Yep. Any other comments? If not, I think, Kathy, I think that...
I appreciate the information here provided as well. And as you know, as you mentioned, we've been working in Northfield for a couple of years now on a Rotary Climate Action team. We've connected with the folks in San Francisco who've actually created a website that I could send around here as well. Alan Anderson from our club is a wonderful speaker on this topic, and would be the one who's probably best to get out there into your different club meetings or online for what we have to do now and speak to this topic. But one idea that we have done, that I think a lot of this is about just taking action and building awareness. And what we've done is created an electric vehicle charging station in Northfield, which is a small bite-sized project. Rotary loves bite-sized projects. They love things that are capital projects that you can put your name or your logo on. And it sends a small message. We worked with the city to create this one. We're working on another location, so we'll actually have 4 ports. And it's not intended for our citizens. It's intended for our community to be a stopping off spot for those with electric vehicles who need to add a few miles to their journey. And it puts us on the map, as I understand electric vehicle owners to be. So we have a lot of information about how that can be done. It could be I think we're doing, we have about $7,000 that we invested in the first one. The city put the other $5,000 or $6,000 into it. The second one's going to be a little more expensive, so we're going to put $9,000 into that one. And as I say, these are bite size. They're symbolic. They're in highly visible locations, and it raises the question of why are they doing this, and why are they taking away these valuable parking spots? Well, let's have the conversation then, and not shrink from the conversation. We've got to get out there and be in people's faces. So just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, thanks.
It's a bathroom facility with picnic tables and shelters, and for the bike trail, for the Gateway Bike Trail. And not only is it a place for community, and now they're building apartments nearby, so looks like we might be adding some children's playground, but we're also looking at adding electrical car charges so that we've got foot traffic, bicycle traffic, getting people out in nature, and hopefully growing it from within, the interest in care. And there, when we have a rain garden with a pollinator garden as part of it, we Anita Jader, who headed up the garden part of it, she got an award from I think it was from the Pollution Control Agency, maybe,
Okay.
for the beautiful work that she did designing that. It's really something. So if you're ever in North St. Paul, it's the park is right by the windmill.
Eventually, I will be there.
Yeah.
And it sounds like I'm going to add another page. It's going to be called projects that clubs are already doing. And so that then it can point individuals, Rotarians and non-Rotarians, to these ideas.